Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Katie Kwana. I'm the Associate Chair here at the Labor Center, and welcome to our book event with Stewart Acuff. His most recent book, which is on sale back there, Playing Bigger Than You Are, A Life in Organizing, chronicles his life. And so if you've read the book, you actually wouldn't need an introduction to him. But since you probably haven't yet, I'll just say that Stewart was formerly the organizing director for the AFL-CIO. And before that, he was an organizer in many different settings, starting off with Acorn, I guess, and you know, different unions, worked with different unions since then. And he has been going around the country promoting his book, so I'll just let him do his usual thing, and we can get into some discussion with him afterwards.
Great. Well, thank you, Katie. I appreciate the invitation. I appreciate the friendship and the sisterhood, and it's great to be here at the Labor Center at the University of California, Berkeley. Except for a year I spent driving a truck all over America and Canada. I was a community organizer for 5 years, and was the first organizer John Sweeney hired as president of SEIU. They sent me to Texas because I think I was the only one in SEIU with a southern accent, Michael, and to organize Beverly nursing home workers. And we organized 12 straight nursing homes. And then I came out here for a little bit to work with 250, and then went to Georgia to start the Georgia State Employees Union, which we grew to about 7,000 people without collective bargaining, without dues checkoff, without meet and confer, without any legal authority or any legal structure. And then I got elected president of the Atlanta AFL-CIO and did a lot of things. That was the best job I will ever have, and did a lot of fun things. But I think the most important was when we succeeded in winning what I think is labor's biggest victory in the South, and that was to unionize the 1996 Olympics, which I want to talk a little bit about from the book. So that's a little bit about me. I'm 57, closer to 60 than I am to 50, which my knees remind me of every day. How many people in here are undergraduates? Any undergraduates? It's okay to be an undergraduate. I was one once. How many are graduate students? How many, whether you're a student or not a student, are or have been organizers? Oh, good. Okay. So the book starts with a short poem that I wrote for workers who are trying to form a union and for organizers who are trying to help them form a union. Doesn't have a title, although I think it should be called Hands. She lowered her head when she spoke, looking at hands and fingers thick from work as if she were reading or studying those hands, which raised her children and the children of others, took care of the sick and helpless. Those hands provided everything. She spoke soft and low as when ashamed you couldn't protect your own dignity, listening with every part of me, reminding her that dignity can be recovered with a fight. And to me, that's a lot of what organizing is about, and it's a lot of what my own role in organizing is about in St. Louis with Acorn, and Dallas with Acorn, and Memphis with Acorn, and rural New Hampshire with Citizen Action, and East Texas, Nacogdoches, where the Ku Klux Klan threatened to cut me from asshole to appetite if I didn't leave, where we organized 12 straight nursing homes, and rural Georgia, where we organized state workers. Everywhere I think all of us go to organize workers who don't have a union, there's a time and a place in their life when their dignity is stolen. Even highly skilled workers, even workers that the boss needs, much less low-skilled workers and low-wage workers. And in my experience, when push comes to shove, when the boss is laying the leather to the workers, when the job has become a hellish place to go every day, and when people are not only threatened and intimidated, but just want some relief, just like, can we smile again in here? Can somebody say hi again in here? Can we have some damn relief? What I think keeps workers going is their own determination to be respected and to have their own dignity recognized and realized by the boss and by other workers. I really think that many workers start out wanting a pay raise and wanting a understanding of what their pay grade is and what they can expect every year, and health care, and some probably even still start out wanting a pension, although that's more and more of a dream all the time. But I don't think that sustains workers through the difficulty of a long, hard organizing campaign. Whether that's an NLRB campaign, whether that's a state PERB campaign, whether it's a strategic leverage campaign, whatever it is, we know the boss fights back by intimidating workers and by making workplace hell. I want to read a little bit from the book, just because I think that's what you do at book events. You can stop me at any point, and I want to read this because, and this is the reason I asked how many were organizers, because it's like an organizer's dream, and it happened to me. And this is about the Olympics. On September 18, 1992, we put 10,000 people, led by the Reverend Jesse Jackson, on the streets of Atlanta, effectively overwhelming the Olympic flag ceremony. That's when they brought the Olympic flag from Barcelona to signal that Atlanta was the seat of the Olympics. We closed down downtown Atlanta. The Journal-Constitution called the march spirited. Our 10,000 people came from every union, especially the building trades, and from every functioning community and civil rights organization in the town. Act Two closed a clothing manufacturing shop and brought everybody from a clothing manufacturing shop. They had no direct stake in the fight. We carried signs proclaiming unions built Atlanta, why not the Olympics? Some unions even bussed activists in from other towns and cities in Georgia, and in some cases neighboring states. As Reverend Jesse Jackson said so clearly, it's not merely an economic struggle, it's a moral struggle. A few months later, we met with our community allies in an all-day meeting to come up. That happened in September and November. We met with our community allies in an all-day meeting to come up with a Christmas wish list for the 1996 Olympics. Thanks to all of the effort that had come before, the list was not one of separate community and labor demands, but a single document with a single list of demands. And I love Christmas actions. That's crazy, but I do. 3 days before Christmas in 1992, 80 disciplined union leaders and staff and 20 equally tough community leaders succeeded in taking over Olympic headquarters to deliver our Christmas list and holding the headquarters for 2 hours. They were able to force a 2-hour meeting on what the 1996 Olympics meant for the workers and average people of Atlanta. At the same time, I was in Mayor Maynard Jackson's office attending a meeting on the same subject. The next day, I got a call from the then Executive Vice President for External Affairs of the Olympic Governing Board, Shirley Franklin. African-American woman who went on to become a 2-term mayor of Atlanta, and a great mayor she was. She said they wanted a meeting the next week, and they wanted the meeting at night in my office. So we met secretly in my office at night in order to have an honest and off-the-record and private meeting. Shirley arrived at my AFL-CIO office in the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers building at the appointed date and time. She brought a silk-stocking lawyer with her. After the niceties, how was your Christmas, and on, the lawyer looked at me and said, Stewart, and I'd never seen this guy before, Stewart, I've been in this work for 25 years, involved in labor and civil rights issues. He didn't mention that always on the company side. And we know that last action got out of hand. It didn't go the way you meant for it to. I've never seen a group of folks take over someone else's space like that. I ignored him, and I looked at Shirley and said, we've been telling you that we will do whatever it takes short of hurting someone to make sure the work on the Olympics is done righteous. To which the lawyer said, does that mean breaking the law? Of course it does, Lloyd, responded Shirley. Then the future mayor, and here's the part I hope you enjoy as much as I did. Then the future mayor leaned forward, rested her arms on her side of my desk, much like I am now, looked me straight in the eye and said, Stewart, when rich white men get scared, I get scared, and rich white men are scared. I responded that maintaining the status quo was not an option. Union density and market share and wages were either going to increase because of the size of the project, or the size of the project was going to force them down. But status quo was not an option. The meeting ended with me wondering when they would call back for more substantive pressing of the issues. They never did. We continued with our coalition work, deepening it, especially with the concerned black clergy. My pastor, Reverend Tim McDonald of First Iconium Church, was chairman. We grounded all our Olympics work in the larger community labor coalition. We also began preparing for the 1993 mayor's race. We decided to endorse City Councilman Bill Campbell, who was controversial, young, and unknown, 41% name recognition, when he decided to run for mayor. The business community and Ambassador Andy Young and some of the civil rights leaders supported Fulton County Commission Chairman Michael Lomax. The county, however, under Lomax, had done $900 million of building non-union. He was a non-starter. Campbell was our candidate. In about March of 1993, the Olympic leadership announced that they would break ground on the new Centennial Olympic Stadium on July 10th. Much fanfare and civic celebration was called for. Reverend McDonald convened our coalition. We agreed to erect a tent city 2 months before groundbreaking on the very site where the new stadium would be built. We also decided to disrupt the groundbreaking if we didn't have an agreement on construction of the stadium, and so we did. On most nights, 40 to 50 community leaders, activists, and homeless people slept on the site. I slept there every night. Shirley Franklin brought soup because she was a decent woman. We had raised so much hell against the Olympic Committee that they didn't want to appear as though they weren't interested in the community or workers. Every night I slept on a cot under an army tent with the side flaps raised, and those of you who know Georgia know that July in Georgia is extremely hot, especially on an asphalt parking lot, even at 3 in the morning. By mid-May, the drama was building. About 2 weeks before the groundbreaking, every local newscast included a live shot from the tent city, Finally, on a Thursday night, 2 nights before the Olympic Stadium groundbreaking, Reverend James Orange, who'd been in Dr. King's inner circle and was the chair of our Jobs with Justice Committee and one of my best friends, Reverend James Orange, Charlie Q, the building trades, and I met in our tent city and came up with a strategy to take over the ceremony. As president of the Atlanta AFL-CIO, I knew the city budget well. I knew how many police officers the city had and how many they could deploy for the event on a Saturday. We had already called for a demonstration on the morning of the groundbreaking. We knew it would draw thousands of our members and allies. The plan we hit upon that Thursday night would send 50 people at a time over the police barricades. Some people call them French barricades, some people call them bicycle barricades, but you know, they look like bicycle racks, you know what I'm talking about. We would send 50 people at a time over the police barricades, assuming that it took at least 2 police officers to handle every person that went over. We felt sure that when a couple of hundred of our folks broke through, the police presence would be exhausted. Then we would simply take the stage and the microphone and turn the groundbreaking into a rally for a just Olympics. About 11 o'clock that same night, when Shirley Franklin arrived with soup for all of us, the Reverend Orange and I pulled her off to the side. "Shirley," I said, "everything we said we would do, we've done. Now I'm telling you that if we don't have an agreement on the stadium by Saturday morning, there won't be a groundbreaking ceremony. Though tonight we figured out exactly how to disrupt the ceremony and take it over." Shirley said she'd make some calls right away. The building trades went into bargaining first thing Friday morning, and by 6:30 p.m. Friday evening, there was an agreement on the construction of the Centennial Olympic Stadium. The news Saturday morning about the groundbreaking was full of the historic agreement reached the day before. Nevertheless, 1,000 of our members and allies showed up for the pre-planned rally, only now it was a rally of unbridled enthusiasm. We were over the hump, but we were a long way from done. There are thousands of different jobs involved in staging the Olympic Games. It was in 1996, it was a $1.5 billion enterprise. Just the stadium was $400 or $500 million, and there were 32 venues that either had to be constructed, swimming pools, field hockey fields, I mean, you name it, or they had to be renovated. They were already in constructed buildings and they had to be renovated. So there was thousands and thousands of jobs, phone jobs, camera jobs, every kind of job you can imagine. Another 30 venues would need to be either constructed or renovated or changed to accommodate Olympic sports. So we got busy on Bill Campbell's campaign against Lomax, doing all we legally could to help him win the November election. And some of the things we did in 1996, they would put you under a jail for doing today. We were successful. He won. And he came to the first Labor Council AFL-CIO meeting after he was sworn in. He came late, as he always was. And he said, "I wouldn't be mayor tonight without the people in this room." And that's why tonight I'm announcing that I'm appointing Stewart Acuff as my representative to the Olympics governing board. And at that moment, we went from the streets to the suites, as they say. And the Olympics was done 100% union. The book is it's about victories, it's about defeats, it's about heartbreaks. It's probably has more written on the split between Change to Win and the AFL-CIO than probably has been written anywhere else. I used to tell our young organizers, this is all about wit and grit. That's all we got. It's about how creative we can be and how determined we can be and whether we're willing to do every day what Shakespeare said was screw your courage to the sticking place. And if people see any weakness in any of us, the thing falls apart. Because there's nothing but organization, tight organization. Organization like an external skeleton in a public sector union, you have an internal skeleton. You have a shop steward system. You have a contract to enforce. You have you have legal ramifications. In a non-bargaining situation, no dues check-off, remember. You have to build an exoskeleton. So it's like the difference between a mammal and an insect, really, you know. And so we worked hard at building that exoskeleton, and we worked hard at maintaining it. And my experience in church, my father was a Baptist minister, and my experience as a community organizer helped us do that. And most of our staff were Southerners. And I'll be honest with you, a lot of our meetings resembled church services because that was the organization people were familiar with. The truth of the matter is that, and maybe I made a mistake because I wrote a book about my own work, but as an organizer, you better be saying we a hell of a lot more than you say I. And as an organizer, you better be listening a hell of a lot more than you're talking. And I'm going to say this about listening. I may have said this earlier. I've had so many conversations this week that I can't remember what I've said from conversation to conversation. But if I said it earlier, please forgive me. When you're on that house call, and the central skill of any organizer is the house call, right? Right? You make the house call with workers, but you also make the house call with allies. When I was organizing director of the AFL-CIO, I made the house call with the president of the AFL-CIO. I made the house call with his chief of staff. I made the house call with the communications director. I didn't use the email. They thought I was crazy. I didn't call up and ask for an appointment. I went and knocked on the door just like you do and tried to talk about what we were going to do. Remember when we were trying to put together the Employee Free Choice Act and trying to decide what the elements of it were going to be, somebody asked Booth what we were going to do. Paul Booth had asked me, and Paul Booth said, Stewart Acuff's going to make a shitload of house calls. That's what we're going to do to try to get to some consensus. The great thing that all of us can do in any campaign, win or lose, is we can be the first person to validate people's pain and anger. To say, goddamn right, you ought to be pissed off, and I'm pissed off for you. I know how that hurts. I can feel it. I can see it in your eyes. And I'm sorry that happened to you. But you know, there's something we can do about it. As Mo Fitzsimons, great organizer, used to work for Act Two, used to say, it is what it is, and it ain't going to change unless you decide to change it. So, at the very minimum, win, lose, or draw, we can give people some power in their own lives. That's one of the things that was, you know, Acorn had its many, many faults, but it was a great place to learn as a young organizer. For one thing, 6 house calls a day doesn't seem like much when you've left Acorn making 30 blind door knocks every night from 4 to dark, living on $50 a week, bologna and turnip greens, and if you're lucky, potatoes and eggs. One of the things about Acorn was that it could never be about you, and you could never get over, and you could never rip anybody off because there wasn't nothing to rip off. You learned how the poorest of your constituency lived. I didn't grow up with much, but I grew up with more than $50 a week. So I think that Wisconsin and Ohio proves the point that we have to maintain strong union organization after we organize. That we cannot, that doesn't mean staff has to run it, but it does mean that you just can't let it go, and you can't tell workers to call a friggin' call center to file a grievance. I mean, you've got to have union power on the job. And the workers in Wisconsin proved that, and in Ohio proved that. I can tell you, in my history, where I saw it done the best was Act Two in the South, the old Act Two, before they merged with the ILG. The old Act Two, where they had a staff culture which was a mix of people like us in this room and workers from the shop floor, where they fought hard all the time and where they organized all the time. And where they understood, and here's the point, you are not, if your strength is only in that facility, you're going to lose. You got to have strength in that sector, in that region, in that and the best example of that is UFCW, right? Publix in the South killed UFCW contracts because they couldn't shut them down and they couldn't organize them. So, and UFCW, I think, would tell you that. So I don't know what your industry is, but you can, let me take building trade. Building trades are a great example. You get a journeyman, let's take the electrical workers. You get a journeyman electrician in a basically low union dense area, Atlanta. He goes out on his own, keeps his card, keeps paying his dues with the blessing of the local, starts his own subcontracting business, working only union electricians, and helps the union up the area agreement, out of business in a year, because he's going to be undercut by every rat contractor in town. And so you're not doing your members a favor if you stop organizing to service them or to negotiate their contract. I'll tell you one of the most exciting things, and I go back to Act Two. This is the old Act Two. This is the Norma Ray Act Two. They had organized National Linen Services, which was the biggest cleaning contractor in the South. And they got down to the final bargaining session. And Bruce Rayner told the boss he wanted to bargain over the phone. And he brought 200 workers into a hotel conference room and invited me, and did the bargaining over a loudspeaker with the boss. And every time there was a glitch, or they weren't ready to sign off on to TA something, he'd say, we're going to take a caucus. And he'd turn the speaker off and put it on hold, and we'd have a conversation with 200 people. It was an amazing, amazing thing. I say that in the context of what you're talking about, because it gave people who were going to lead the union in the shop, it was their contract, right? It wasn't Rayner's contract. It wasn't the union's contract. It was their contract. And it also helped them understand that if that contract was going to get better, they were going to have to organize more laundries in the South. That's one of the reasons CWA has such good contracts, because before wireless, they had the industry. and they fight the non-union wireless every day, every damn day. Every Thursday I see Larry Cohen, he's wearing a red shirt. Every damn day they keep that fight up against the non-union wireless. So I'm a firm believer in, when we were organizing state workers in Georgia, we made no distinction between servicing and organizing. If you were the Milledgeville organizer, then you ran the meetings for the workers who were in the union. You made the house calls for the workers who were behind on their dues. And you organized the next facility, right? All at the same time, all together. And, I lived on the road.
The issue there is, that's a good example. If you're this one guy, if you organize enough facilities, you're not going to have any time left to go and organize the next one because you got 10 shops and all those people are calling you and they're the ones who pay you. So you got to call them back first before you go and
You got to call them back first, but if you've organized 10 facilities and you got dues checkoff and you've got union shop, you ought to be able to hire somebody to help you out of one of those shops, right? Or two. Sometimes union leaders forget that, boy, I could talk all day about this stuff, Katie. Sometimes union leaders forget that the people who are most loyal to them are the new people they brought into the union. There's nothing to fear for an elected leader from a new shop. You've given people something they never had before, or you've helped them build something they never had before, which is power. And in my case, I've seen it not only workplace power, but personal power. I've seen women leave abusive relationships because they felt their power and because they felt like they could make a living and do it on their own, and that they learned that they deserved better than an abusive husband or man hanging around the house. I think sometimes well, no, I'm not going to say that. You just got to do both. And you can't. If you fall down on the union presence question, I don't mean it's related to servicing, but it's not just servicing. It's the feeling when you go to work that I got a union here, and if he doesn't like the way I wear my hair, he can go to hell, Or if he doesn't like the fact that I got an earring in my ear, he can go to hell. Or if he doesn't like my t-shirt, he can go to hell because I got a union here. That feeling of union presence, right? It's more than servicing. It's why the steel workers can have a 2,000 worker shop in Union City, Tennessee, 100 miles from Memphis, 150 miles from St. Louis, and only have 6 non-members. Because when you walked in there, you felt the presence of the union. And until you joined the union, you didn't eat lunch with nobody. You didn't have coffee with nobody. You didn't go hunting with nobody. You didn't go fishing with nobody. And if you were lucky, you had all 4 tires after work. If you were lucky. Probably shouldn't have said that on camera, should I?
So, I think back to, when Sweeney came into the AFL-CIO and all this, everybody looking at the decline in union density and the idea of doing multi-union organizing drives and various things that come out. And here we are today, and we've been going through these incredible attacks on public sector workers, and the line is consistently, nobody else besides you has pensions anymore, nobody else besides you has good health care anymore.
Great question.
You can't hold on to the public sector without private sector organizing. There was a theory around EFCA to open things up. Obviously, politics got in the way of that. So where do you see the
death got in the way of AFL-CIO. I mean, if you want to know the truth, Harry Reid did a really smart thing. He asked Mark Pryor to lead the fight in the Senate, which would have gotten us Blanche Lincoln, who would have gotten us Mary Landrieu. But we couldn't get Ted Kennedy and Robert Byrd on the floor at the same time. We had the 60 votes for cloture. And I think Larry would back me up on that, but we couldn't, they were dying. I'll relive that year every night for the rest of my life. Here's what I think is our biggest problem right now that we got to get on right now. And this, I'm going to be singing out of this songbook for a long time. We have to have fights, big fights right now that resonate with our members and non-members. We have to have a fight about inequality in America. A big fight, a big, ugly fight. We have to have some very smart strategic thinking about how do you use the power of disruption in an anti-terrorist quasi-military state. I don't have the answer to that. Occupy got us a third of the way there, right? They taught us a lot. The tea baggers taught us a lot too, even though they were fake. You know, they weren't real. They were congressional staff and hacks and nuts. Fox made them look much bigger than they were. They changed the debate, and then the occupiers changed it back. And the occupiers got us about a third of the way there. But we got to have a fight about inequality right now. I mean, starting today, we got to have a fight about inequality. Where is the money going to? We have 35 years of stagnant wages. That's first time in the history of the country that wages haven't kept up with productivity. That's why we can't get out of the economic crisis. There's no consumer buying power. Dr. Levins and I wrote a book about it. I recommend it to you. It's called Getting America Back to Work. It's why we need a productive stimulus that not only puts people to work, but helps the country and the economy. Green power, wind power. I mean, there is, so anyway, one of my heroes is Cornel West. I think he's the most important black public intellectual, and maybe the most important intellectual in America today. I love Tavis Smiley. But I think it's ridiculous that Cornel West and Tavis Smiley are the only ones talking about inequality. God bless them for doing it. That's not a criticism of them. But, when they go on Morning Joe and talk about inequality, yay, yay, yay. But every Democrat who goes on there ought to talk about inequality. And there ought to be union leaders on there talking about inequality. And we ought to have rallies and marches and every campaign, organizing campaign, every strike, every lockout ought to be about inequality. Where's the damn money going to? How much do you need? You know, as Tom Woodruff said, you know, some rich guy got a divorce, and the discovery got public and found out he had a house with 32 bathrooms. How could one person be so full of shit he needed 32 bathrooms? I mean, after 5 houses, 2 yachts, and 20 cars, what else can you want? You know? And I'm here to tell you, as a person of faith, we got a bunch of preachers and rabbis and imams who ought to be talking about this. The steelworkers, it was one of the joys of my life. I'm a person of faith. Steelworkers, during the whole thing about voter suppression, and I'm so proud of the way we beat back the voter suppression. That was a movement, okay? That was a movement. We can't create movements. We don't know how. We do know the elements of movement, some of them. It's got to be spontaneous. It's got to allow for creativity. It's got to capture people's imagination. It's got to be in people's self-interest. It's got to be readily identifiable self-interest. There's a great book written by a guy named Alden Morse about the civil rights movement. It's called Organizing the Movement. It was about the people who put the elements in place before Dr. King came to town. So the first example is the Montgomery bus boycott, which the groundwork was laid by a shop steward for the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters named E.D. Nixon in Montgomery. And he was the one who recruited Dr. King to lead it. Dr. King was 26 years old, just out of Boston University Theological Seminary, had studied Gandhi. You know, he had a personal, a soulful, a spirit-filled, and an intellectual framework for the struggle that he saw was coming. But he wasn't ready to lead, what was it, Dr. Brody, 18-month boycott? Asked people to walk to work for 18 months, asked people to hitch rides for 18 months. He wasn't ready to do that. E.D. Nixon talked him into doing it. What we ought to be doing right now is beginning to set the groundwork that a movement can build on. And that means every fight we have, in my view, every fight we have ought to begin and end with inequality. That's not the only thing. But it's time for us to start having big fights over big issues, not piddly-ass little issues, but big issues. Reindustrialization, green power. God gave us a natural wind tunnel where nobody lives, from North Dakota to Texas, that we ought to fill with wind farms. And electrical workers and utility workers ought to run transmission lines from those wind farms to Chicago and Minneapolis and St. Paul and Denver, and blah, 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 and on and on and on. And what we talk about infrastructure as make work, and the truth is that the better your infrastructure is, the higher your productivity is. Why don't we talk about that? You know, it makes me crazy that, and then I can't help but do this, Katie. These idiots who are following this half-ass novelist who wasn't a good novelist and certainly wasn't a social scientist, from Russia named Ayn Rand, and dividing the country up into makers and takers. You know what? I started working when I was 11 years old. I started bucking bales. I started driving a tractor. I started working when I was 11 years old. My grandmama was the daughter of a sharecropper. My mama was raised on a yeoman's farm. I went to the cotton fields with my mom and daddy when I was 3, 4, 5, 6 years old until my granddaddy died to help them get in the cotton crop. I didn't have to pick the cotton, but my parents did. But I'm a taker. I washed dishes to get through college, and the state paid me to do it. I had a below market rate loan at 3% because in those days our government thought it made sense for us to have an educated middle class, which it obviously doesn't think it does now. I'm a taker. When some son of a bitch stands there and says 47% of the people in this country are no count, sorry, lazy, won't take responsibility for themselves, that is not a patriot. You cannot be a patriot and write off half the people in your country. And then when Paul Ryan said, well, he lowered it down to only 30% of us are takers. Um, so, and they're the biggest takers of all. Hell, Romney made jillions of dollars off our bankruptcy laws. Jillions of dollars off our bankruptcy laws. Paul Ryan ain't had an honest job in his life. He wouldn't know what except for his P90X thing, he wouldn't know what a backache felt like or sore feet felt like. You know what I'm saying? First, they have to feel the union in their workplace. That's the first challenge. And they've got to feel the union in their workplace, and they've got to understand what the union has done for them before they can talk to other workers about what the union can do for those other workers. Second, it's got to be fun. Third, it's never a mass of workers. It's always, and I'm not a sectarian, I'm not a revolutionary, but it's the best word. It's a cadre. It's a few people who make those house calls with you. And there's got to be food, and it's got to be fun, and it's got to be a lot of laughter, and they've got to be honored every time the union gathers. Everybody who ever made a house call for your union at every meeting ought to be asked to stand and given a round of applause. I think people who, it's one thing to be a shop steward, and I don't want to denigrate that at all because the whole labor movement rests on the shoulders of shop stewards. Whole labor movement rests on the shoulders of shop stewards. But you can do that when you're 8 hours at work. To go at 4 o'clock when you're tired and make house calls, that's a different deal, you know? And there ought to be dinner in there somewhere. No, I'm not kidding. There ought to be dinner in there somewhere. If your union's not willing to budget for dinner for your members who are making house calls after they worked all day, you know, I ain't saying it's got to be steak, but at least I'll be fried chicken. I mean, and it's got to be fun. I mean, we used to house call in Georgia. We would house call in Texas and Georgia when I was a street organizer. We would house call with a car full of people. So 3 or 4 or 5 people go up to the door, you know? Not to intimidate anybody, but to say, look, we're all together. We want you with us. You got a minute? Can we talk about it, you know? And maybe the organizer would get the conversation started or get you in the house because the organizer should have enough experience to know how to do that. You got a minute to talk about the job? Or maybe the organizer ought to be the one who scares the dog away in the yard. But we have to realize that the main reason, and Dr. Brody knows this better than I do, the main reason we did sit-down strikes in the 30s was because we couldn't get a majority to walk out. Sit-down strikes were a minority strategy. There were 2 reasons for the sit-down strikes. One was we were afraid we couldn't get a majority to walk out, so we took over the factory with the minority. And the second was we could defend ourselves from inside the plant, like they did at Flint, you know, throwing bolts and actually fabricating weapons in the shop. I think sometimes we think we got to have more than we do. The truth of the matter is we got to do with what we got, and we got to build on what we got. But there's a lot of times we got to do with what we got. Saul Alinsky said, and I'm not a huge Alinsky fan, I give him his credit. He was a great man. Like any of the rest of us, he had faults, and he had faults in his thinking, like any of the rest of us. But he said something very smart. You know, if you have enough people overwhelm them. If you don't, disrupt them. And if you don't have enough to disrupt them, stink the joint up. And there's power in disruption. And I think we've got to be willing, and this is something that I think people in high union dense places sometimes forget, is disruption really discombobulates bosses. When they lose control, when they don't know what's going to happen next, when their ass is on the grass for production, their ass is on the line for production, disruption, or when a city doesn't know how it's going to handle a given fight, I think Wisconsin is a good example of that. You know, we don't give our brothers and sisters in Wisconsin enough credit. We say we lost because we didn't get the governor. Hell, we recalled 2 senators, first time in history in Wisconsin. Any senator had been recalled. They recalled 2 senators, and they made a brand new governor shit his pants every morning for 6 months, wondering whether or not he was going to get recalled. And if you went to Wisconsin, and I did, every shop around the Capitol had, "We're with the workers, we're with the workers, open to the workers." You know, every shop in the block around the Capitol.
Well, so unfortunately, we're going to have to close down the informal part of the discussion. I mean, the formal part of the discussion.
The real formal, Katie.
Yeah. And I just want to say it's been an extremely interesting conversation. We were just talking about legislative strategy, but we're also talking about big actions and disruption, and we were talking about door knocking and servicing, and organizing, and what's the balance. So it's been a discussion that's been wide-ranging, and I want to thank everybody for being a participant in it. And if you want to know how Stewart got to be so smart, pick up a copy of the book that is for sale in the back. And Tika and Shit are holding, see that sign?
That's
being
right.
held up there. They'll gladly take your money, and I'm sure Stewart doesn't want to take the books back home with him.
I don't, and I will sign it, and I will put in it exactly what you want me to say. To the smartest person I've ever met in Berkeley. Thank you all. Thanks very much. Thank you very much.